The storm arrived in Toronto with no warning, a wall of rain that erased the skyline and left the city trembling under steel-gray clouds. Lightning cracked across Lake Ontario, and in that split second of illumination, Elise Montgomery saw her reflection in the mirrored glass of the factory doors, pale, drawn, and unsuspecting of the ruin waiting inside. For 12 years, she had walked through those doors with her lunch bag and her quiet determination, her identity forged by early mornings, clattering machines, and the rhythm of survival. She thought stability was built by endurance, that loyalty had a currency. She was wrong. The air smelled of grease and metal as she entered the corridor, her boots echoing on concrete, and for a moment she imagined it was just another morning. But then came the voice of her supervisor, clipped and unceremonious, calling her name without warmth. A cardboard box appeared in his hands, filled with her belongings. One sentence followed, delivered without compassion. Her position was eliminated, effective immediately. 12 years dissolved into nothing. The hum of the factory seemed to mock her, machines still running while she was discarded like scrap. The fluorescent lights above flickered, as though the building itself was indifferent. Elisa's chest hollowed, her pulse a drumbeat of disbelief. She carried the box out into the rain, each drop stinging like accusation. By the time she reached home in Hamilton, soaked and exhausted, she still clung to the fragile hope that the walls of her house, the laughter of her son Noah, the softness of family, would be her shelter. But the house was no longer hers. Mark, her husband, stood in the kitchen with his arms crossed and his eyes stripped of affection. His words landed colder than the factory's dismissal he was leaving, and he was taking Noah with him. Elise felt the ground tilt, her body unable to anchor itself. She stared at the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, the echoes of bedtime stories, the soccer cleats by the door, and realized that her life had been dismantled in less than a day. She sank onto the living room couch, the weight of both losses pressing until her lungs struggled for air. Every sacrifice, the late-night shifts, the quiet endurance of Mark's dismissals, the careful budgeting to provide stability, suddenly seemed like dust slipping through her fingers. Shame slithered into her veins, whispering failure. She asked herself if she had failed as a wife, a mother, a provider. The silence of the house, broken only by the ticking of the clock, became unbearable. Elise stepped outside into the storm, her hands trembling as though her body could no longer contain her grief. She wandered through the streets of Hamilton without direction, the streetlights bleeding halos across wet pavement. Every familiar landmark became a ghost of what she had lost, the park where Noah had played, the corner store where she had bought milk on rushed mornings, the sidewalks they once walked together. Each memory was now a wound. The city that had once felt like home turned into a labyrinth of reminders that she had been erased. The rain soaked through her jacket, plastering her auburn hair to her face, but she welcomed the chill, a punishment she believed she deserved. She thought of her childhood in Muskoka, where her father's stern voice taught her discipline and her mother's gentler touch taught her patience. They had raised her to believe that hard work was a shield against disaster, that perseverance was a form of love. But standing there, shivering on a desolate street corner, Elise realized that life had no obligation to honor effort. She drifted until she found herself near a small diner, its neon sign flickering with stubborn persistence. The warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk like a fragile promise. She pushed open the door, the chime ringing faintly, and was met by the scent of coffee and frying bacon. A handful of patrons sat scattered in booths, unaware of her unraveling. She slid into a corner booth, clutching her box of belongings as though it were the last evidence of her existence. The waitress set down a steaming mug, and Elise stared into its dark surface, seeing a distorted version of herself around her. Life went on. An old man stirred his soup. A couple laughed softly. The hum of conversation rose and fell. The normalcy was almost unbearable, a reminder that her world had collapsed while everyone else's remained intact. She sipped the coffee, its bitterness anchoring her for a moment, and let the tears slip silently down her cheeks. In that fragile silence, a presence slid into the booth across from her. Elise lifted her gaze to meet the eyes of an older woman, silver-haired, her face marked by time yet softened by wisdom. The woman carried herself with an authority that needed no words. She simply said five that would etch themselves into Elise's bones. "You will rise from this." The words startled Elise, not because they were loud, but because they carried the weight of conviction. The woman's gaze seemed to pierce through her despair, pulling at the fragments of strength buried beneath grief. For the first time since the morning, Elise felt a flicker small, almost imperceptible of defiance against the emptiness threatening to consume her. The old woman left as quietly as she came, her departure unnoticed by others, as though she had been conjured by Elise's desperation. Elise sat frozen, the words echoing in her mind, their truth impossible to ignore. "You will rise from this." She left the diner that night with the storm still raging outside, but something shifting within. She walked the slick streets back toward the remnants of her home, her box of belongings clutched to her chest, the weight of despair still heavy but no longer absolute. She thought of Noah's small hands, his laughter, his trust. She thought of the injustice of being discarded, of being stripped of everything without warning. And beneath her grief, anger began to kindle a fire that whispered she was not finished, that her story was not over. The nights that followed were a blur of sleepless hours and hollow mornings. Elise stayed in a small rented room above a convenience store, the hum of traffic below her window a constant reminder of survival's harsh demands. She replayed the moments again and again, the factory's fluorescent corridor, Mark's cold declaration, Noah's confused face as he was led away. Each memory tore at her, but each also sharpened her resolve. She began writing in a journal, pouring her anguish into ink. At first, the pages were filled with grief, questions without answers, self-blame. But slowly, the words shifted. She wrote about justice, about truth, about reclaiming what had been stolen. She listed the lies Mark had told, the financial manipulations she had ignored, the erosion of affection she had endured in silence. She cataloged them not as wounds, but as evidence. During long walks along the harbor front, Elise allowed herself to imagine a future not the one she had lost, but a different one, forged from the ashes of betrayal. She thought about rebuilding, not as the quiet woman who endured, but as someone who fought. She remembered her mother's voice telling her that patience was not weakness, but she also remembered her father's lessons about strength. For the first time, she considered that both could coexist within her. The city began to transform in her eyes. Where once she saw reminders of loss, she now saw stages for her return. The courthouse, where truth could be demanded. The banks, where trails of deceit could be uncovered. The neighborhoods, where whispers of Mark's infidelities lingered. Each corner held not just ghosts, but potential weapons. Elise knew she could not reclaim what was hers by waiting for justice to arrive. She would have to create it, stitch it together from fragments, sharpen it against the blade of her pain. She would become deliberate, methodical, relentless. Her grief had been deep, but her anger was deeper still, and it promised a transformation she had never imagined for herself. The woman in the diner had been right. She would rise from this, but she would not rise quietly. The days after Elise's collapse bled together like a long Canadian winter gray, cold, unrelenting. Yet beneath the surface of her grief, something fierce began to grow. In the silence of her rented room above the convenience store, she mapped her pain into purpose. Her journal became less confession and more blueprint, the first drafts of a life she would reconstruct from ruin. Elise knew that grief could paralyze or sharpen. She chose the latter. She began to investigate, piecing together fragments of Mark's betrayal. Old bank statements revealed unusual withdrawals, subtle transfers into accounts she had never known existed. Mortgage papers bore signatures that did not match her hand, lines of ink that carried the falseness of forgery. Neighbors spoke in cautious tones of seeing Mark with another woman, whispers Elise had once dismissed as gossip, but now recognized as proof. Each discovery felt like a cut, but she cataloged them with meticulous care. She sought advice quietly, traveling to Toronto under the guise of day jobs, where she met with a lawyer specializing in family law and financial misconduct. The lawyer's office overlooked the city's endless towers, and Elise stood there, clutching her binder of evidence, knowing this was the beginning of war. The lawyer explained the labyrinth ahead: custody battles, financial restitution, the need for patience and precision. Elise listened, her jaw set. She was ready. At the same time, she rebuilt herself in small ways. She took a part-time job at a delivery service, hauling packages across Hamilton's neighborhoods. It was grueling, the kind of work that bruised her muscles and scraped her hands. But each paycheck reminded her that she could survive without Mark, without the factory, without anyone else's approval. She ate frugally, saved carefully, and funneled every spare dollar into her case. Her body hardened, her mind sharpened. She ran along the harbor front in the early mornings, breath steaming in the cold air, each stride a declaration that she was not broken. She read at night, books on resilience, on the psychology of control, on women who had rebuilt themselves from ashes. Every page fed her conviction. But the heart of her strength was Noah. Though separated, she wrote him letters daily, letters she did not send but which kept her tethered to him. She wrote of her love, of memories of their hikes through Algonquin Park, of her promise that she would never abandon him. Each letter ended with the same vow: I will return to you. When the first court date arrived, Elise walked into the Hamilton courthouse with her shoulders squared, her binder clutched like a shield. Mark sat across from her, polished and smug, his lawyer whispering into his ear. He looked at her as though she were already defeated. But Elise had brought more than pain. She had brought evidence: bank records, forged documents, witness testimonies. Piece by piece, she laid bare the deceit he had constructed. The judge listened, stone-faced, as Elise spoke not with theatrics, but with steady clarity. She recounted the years of silent endurance, the sudden collapse, the trail of lies. Her voice did not shake. For the first time, she felt the weight of truth shift from burden to weapon. Mark's lawyer tried to dismiss her claims, but the evidence was too precise, too undeniable. The forged mortgage signatures alone painted a damning picture. When Elise presented recordings of Mark's late-night phone calls, conversations she had unearthed from their shared files, his composure cracked. For the first time, he looked unsettled. The ruling did not come immediately, but Elise knew she had shifted the battlefield. The judge ordered further review, temporary visitation rights, and an injunction against Mark's financial manipulations. It was not the final victory, but it was the first crack in his armor. In the weeks that followed, Elise intensified her efforts. She traced Mark's hidden assets through Toronto real estate records, uncovering a downtown condo purchased under a false name. She confronted the bank with evidence of fraud, forcing them to freeze accounts he had thought untouchable. Every move tightened the net around him. Her own life remained modest: delivery shifts, sparse meals, long nights over documents, but she carried herself with a new fire. Friends who had once pitied her now looked at her with awe. The woman who had once been quiet, enduring, was now relentless. The second hearing arrived in spring, the city thawing from winter. Blossoms lining the courthouse steps. Elise walked in wearing the same plain coat, but her presence filled the room. This time, she brought the final pieces, the real estate records, the bank's confirmation of fraud, and testimony from Mark's former colleague, who revealed how he had boasted about taking everything from her. The courtroom shifted. Mark's lawyer faltered, scrambling to explain, but the evidence crushed every defense. The judge's ruling was clear: joint custody restored, financial restitution ordered, fraudulent property transfers reversed. The words washed over Elise like a tide of justice. She had not only survived, she had fought, and she had won. But the true revenge was not in the papers or the restitution. It was in the look on Mark's face as the gavel fell, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of consequence. Elise did not gloat. She did not need to. The silence between them was enough. Afterward, she walked out of the courthouse into the crisp Canadian air, the city alive with spring. Noah ran into her arms, his laughter breaking months of silence, his small body pressing against her with trust renewed. Elise held him close, tears streaming freely, not of grief, but of reclamation. The months that followed were not easy, but they were full. Elise balanced work with motherhood, building new routines that were simple yet profound: breakfasts without hurry, walks along Lake Ontario, evenings filled with homework and quiet laughter. She was not perfect, but she was present, and that presence was everything Noah needed. Mark faded into the background, his reputation tarnished, his finances gutted by the very greed that had driven him. Elise did not need to pursue him further. Life itself delivered the justice he deserved. Sometimes, late at night, Elise thought of the diner and the silver-haired woman whose 5 words had sparked her transformation. "You will rise from this." She never saw her again, but the memory remained, etched into her bones. That night had been the threshold between destruction and rebirth. Now, standing on the balcony of her small but bright apartment, Noah asleep inside, Elise looked out over the city lights of Hamilton and felt the pulse of her new life. She had been broken, discarded, erased. But she had risen, not quietly, not passively, but with fire. Her scars had become her armor, her grief, her fuel, her justice, her victory. Elise Montgomery had lost everything, and in losing it, she had found herself.